I'm Anderson, day 32 of 100 Days of Thankfulness. Today I'm talking about the importance of science and also why I'm so thankful for Dr. Hugh Ross, who authored a book called The Fingerprint of God. So this morning I woke up and in my bedroom I found this little present from my 4-year-old Dylan. And if you can see that, that's a dandelion weed he pulled out of the yard. And for him, in his 4-year-old mind, I'm sure this is something that's more than just a weed. It's something that's beautiful. It's something that's kind of magical. You blow on it and it spreads seed all over the wind. And to me, that's what science is all about. It's having that love for the everything around us and that curiosity to try to understand things a little bit more. I remember when I was a kid, I had a jar and I would collect grasshoppers and crickets, and I would just study them. And later on, I'd go to the lake and I'd get that murky water and study the organisms under a microscope, and I would collect frogs and tadpoles and turtles, and you already know about the crayfish. So to me, that fascination has never really died off. I still have that in me. The more that I study and the more that I search and find answers about the universe, just the more strangely beautiful and bizarre things that I discover are out there. Just look at some of the amazing pictures that the Hubble telescope has made, and you'll see what I'm talking about. So growing up, I actually didn't grow up in the church. I grew up with this scientific mindset, and so naturally it grew into asking questions about the universe. And when you start asking questions about the universe, it's also very natural to start asking questions about God. And when you turn that corner and you start looking at for answers about God, and in my case I turned to the Bible and I opened it, chapter 1, Genesis, I right away had all these logical and scientific objections because it so conflicted with everything I had learned up to that point. And I think that's the way, a lot of us, unfortunately, end up approaching the Bible, is we come at it from that scientific perspective, and we don't know God yet, we don't have this love for God yet, but we have this love for science. And that's okay. I mean, I think for me, what I needed was, I didn't need someone to, say to me, okay, who was a Bible expert, and say, well, it says right here in, this book and this chapter and this verse that God is light, and that explains why light was there before, the sun and stars, and that's the explanation for you. I think, this, in order for the book of Genesis to hold up, I actually needed someone who's not only an expert in the Bible, but an expert in the field of science, who could actually explain both and how they both work together. And for me, that was Dr. Hugh Ross in his book, The Fingerprint of God. It explains exactly that, the account of Genesis as told from the perspective of a scientist, and how it actually matches up with science. So I recommend you check that out. But I want to share, not just for, I don't want to talk just to the scientist who doesn't yet believe in the Bible, but I also want to talk to the person who believes in the Bible, but just maybe isn't all that thrilled with science, or with, doesn't have a very healthy respect for, for science in general, because of these conflicts that seem to come up. As I mentioned before, it's not really, science versus religion. It's more, we have two competing religions, theism versus atheism, and we have two competing scientific belief systems, creationism versus evolution. So there is that conflict, but the way that I feel that it gets resolved is very much, the way that Darwin approached things, is, to look at both sides in order to find that truth in the middle. And in this case, I would say find that expert who is an expert in both sides, and listen to his expert opinion. But I want to talk about, say, for someone who believes in the Bible, but yet, isn't all that thrilled with the scientific explanations that are coming up out there, go watch the movie. It's actually a documentary called The Privileged Planet, or This Privileged Planet. In there, it talks about how God has created the earth in such a miraculous way, but not just for the purpose of us having life, but also so that we could have science. God meant for us all to have science. God loves science, and it's showed very clearly in that documentary. Take, for example, if you look at the moon and the sun is about, the diameter of the sun is about 400 times the diameter of the moon. Yet, coincidentally, the distance of the sun is about 400 times the distance as the moon is from the earth. Now, I realize the moon, when it goes around the earth, it's not perfectly circular, it's elliptical. So there's times where the moon is actually slightly closer to the earth and slightly further at other times. So as a result, what you see when you have a perfect eclipse is the moon, at sometimes it'll completely block out all the sun, and at other times it'll, the sun will just slightly peek through on both sides. But because of that relative size difference, when Einstein in 1915 came up with his theory of relativity, he was facing all kinds of objections from the scientific community at that time, primarily because he didn't have a whole lot of experimental evidence. All he had was theories. And so in 1919 was when they were able to do that study where they used that solar eclipse of the sun in order to conduct the study. Because the sun was blocked, they could actually measure how certain stars that were just off the horizon of the sun, they could actually measure how the light was being bent around the sun based on the gravitational pull of the sun. And so that was enough evidence to actually show and prove that Einstein's theory was correct. Now look at the bigger picture too of the Earth, or I should say the solar system and its placement in the Milky Way. We actually are on a branch in the Milky Way galaxy where we have sort of a window's eye view into the rest of the universe. Most of the other locations within the Milky Way we would not be able to see anywhere near what we can see today, through the Hubble telescope and whatnot. So that just kind of tells me that God intended us to want to explore the universe and want to seek answers to our scientific questions. And so, I just share that because I feel like we have this conflict oftentimes of, science disagreeing with, the biblical truths, and, people that are, that believe in the biblical truths are disagreeing with science, when in reality there is a truth out there, and only by appreciating the other side can we come to any sort of agreement about some of these things. Now, why is it important for someone who's a Christian to learn more about science? If for no other reason, it's to be able to answer some of these scientific objections that might come your way. Now, why is it important for a scientist to believe more about the Bible? The answer is simply that this life is finite, right? We can do a lot with our science in order to further the body of human knowledge, and then in that way our life can go forward. But our life has God intended so much more for our lives, and our life does continue beyond this one. So it's definitely a good thing to, if you can figure out a way to overcome some of your objections. And the way to overcome your objections isn't just by, dismissing everything that you know to be true. The way you overcome the objections is by seeking out those experts like Dr. Hugh Ross. Don't go to, just someone who you can't even relate to and expect him to be able to answer all your questions. For me, I didn't have a lot of emotional objections because I didn't have, any kind of rough upbringing in the church like I've heard some people have had. But, that first book that I recommend about learning about the character of Jesus in Edwin Lewis Cole's book on Becoming a Real Man, that, for me, pretty much would have handled any kind of emotional objection I had about the church, because it's not about the church so much as it's about Jesus. It's about learning who Jesus is and learning his character in order to overcome any kind of emotional objection you might have about Christianity. As far as any logical objection, I shared with you, what I had as logical objections was overcome by my philosophy course, but certainly C.S. Lewis' book on Mere Christianity is also an excellent start in that area. And then, I've already gone on at length about, the scientific objections that I had being very much answered in Dr. Hugh Ross's series of books. And his website as well is phenomenal. So I'll provide a link for that so you guys can do further research, but I just want to say thanks once more to Dr. Hugh Ross.